Hi, you can see we got our frame back from the metal cleaners. It's beautiful. No rust, no grease. It really makes it nice to work on. We're going to overhaul this front suspension. As you can see, we've already made some preparations here. We've taken the sway bar off, disconnected it from the frame, and also from the lower control arm. We got our spring compressor in. This took us about a half an hour. It's quite a job, but we're going to show you how to do it after we get it out of here. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to take the brake drum off. It's really great working on these clean parts. This frame, all this suspension. It costs anywhere from about $125, $150, maybe up to as much as $400 to have this done. But I tell you, it's worth it. We've already got the brakes out. We took those out before it went to the stripper because we didn't want to damage anything in here. So our next move is we're going to take the kingpin out. To make this a little easier to get to that kingpin, we're going to take the backing plate off. I've already taken the cotter key out of this too. Next, we got a pin in here that holds this kingpin in place. A lot of times they've got a nut on them. This is just driven in. You notice where the bearing rides. This thrust bearing is probably going to have some shims in it. There's also a grease plug in the top of this, like a freeze plug in a car. Instead of prying that out, we'll try to drive the kingpin up through the bottom. Well, that came out easy. Here's those shims I was telling you about. This bearing, this is the thrust part of this bearing. That's where all your weight goes. It goes down on this spindle. It sits like this. You want to remember that. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to take out this lower pin and drop this A-frame down and lift the spring out. Before we do that, we're going to take a jack and put underneath here. We don't want it to fall out on us. Ray, could you bring the jack over here and slip it underneath there?
Okay.
That's enough.
That'll be enough.
That's enough. Ready to go.
Okay, Fred, I'll let the jack down easy if you want to make sure the spring don't fall out and hurt you. Fred, let's talk about that spring compressor right now.
This is a rubber seat to keep the spring from squeaking. You can see how this works. We stuck it inside this opening with these hooks, and this was opened about this wide, and we just had to pull these 4 rings closer together, enough to get the tension off of this. You don't want to take that out under tension. That spring can pop out of there and kill you. Got to be very careful with it.
You're going to take this off first, Fred, or what are you going to do?
We'll take this off first, and we'll take these loose, both here and here. It'll be easier to loosen them on the car.
Okay.
Well, we've got it all apart. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to put a new shaft and bushing in here and a new shaft and bushings in here and reassemble this back on the frame. We're going to take this spindle up to the automotive machine shop. Got a new kingpin set here, new pin, new thrust bearing like I talked about before, and the bushings. This bushing will fit right on this pin. But after it's pressed into this spindle, it's going to tighten up. And they're going to have to use a reamer or a hone and hone it out so that this pin will fit good and tight in it. And we just don't have that equipment. You won't have it either. So we'll take that up to the machine shop and get that done. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to put new inner control arm shafts in both of these arms. Ray, you want to help me with this?
Sure. Turn it. Okay, Fred, we got the old one.
Let's
Smash
make
it
sure,
up.
Yeah.
Smash it up to make sure the new one. It looks good. Same thing.
Yeah, but they didn't supply any new rubber cups with this. Let's just use the old ones over again. They look good.
Somebody's already stole out of the package. Oops, I dropped that one.
Okay, and we're going to need a little grease, a little white lube.
Okay. Hopefully they'll go in there nice and easy.
They should.
Okay.
That's the old one. You want to start these both at the same time so that this shaft remains centered.
Okay, looks like it's all right. Fred, just wind them up just half close with that because we're going to use a wrench here. Okay, now Fred, you know we've got to torque these up to about 140 pounds according to our manual. So we'll do that after we get it on the car. Let's do this. Let's do the upper. Okay, what about the upper shaft? Get new rubbers with that one?
I hope so. Yep.
Sure did.
Oops.
Okay, let's put a little white lube on.
The first part of these bushings is not threaded. That's to help you get this started and centered properly. Now turn it over, Ray. we've got to put a tool in here to push this apart about 1/16 of an inch. And you'll find this in your manual. This measures exactly 6 inches, and we want to spread this about 1/16 of an inch. Your manual tells you this. You need a manual to work on one of these cars.
The idea is to hold that 1/16 of an inch though, Fred, until you get through putting this in, right?
Right. Yeah, I'll get a wrench here.
Okay. Not too much.
Let's see here.
I think you're going to have to measure the back side.
Got to go a little further here.
Okay. Measure from here, Fred. I think you'll be more accurate reading. It's on the money?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, now with that in there, we can tighten this up without crushing these two forks together. Okay, take the other side. On this side. That's good. Okay, now we're ready to sit that on there. Got some bolts for this, Fred?
Mm-hmm. You got them all started, Ray?
Right.
Next thing we're going to do, we're going to tighten up all these bolts on this upper control arm. Then we're going to put the lower control arm on. We're going to set the spring up in there and put the spindle support on. Put the jack underneath of it. We'll be ready for that spindle that we sent out to have the new bushings put in. Won't take us long. We'll have this whole thing done. You can see we got the lower control arm in, we got the spring set back in, we got the spindle support in. In the bottom of this spindle support, we screwed in a new bushing. This is the old bushing here. And through that goes this bolt. No big deal. This top one, this is where you get all your adjustment on your front end. You can see how this is offset here. So we got a new one for that. Slip it right in, put the bolt in that holds it in there. We've got a couple of rubber cups here that go in here. Raise that jack up, Ray. Jack comes in handy. It sure saves a lot of muscle pulling.
I might have to put a little weight on the frame, Fred, because
Okay, let me get these bushings in here. They come off.
that one there's. Okay, Fred, we'll leave that loose because that's got to be aligned.
Okay.
Okay, now,
Next thing we're going to do is put our spindle on that we got back from the from the automotive machine shop
There's your bushing with your...
with our shims. An
I'll
easy
put
way
a
to...
little- I'll put a little grease on this.
Okay. We'll slide that pin up from underside.
Wait just a second. Let me get that off that way. Go the other way, I'm sorry. Okay. Put her up a little further. That's it. Now, Fred, let's put this freeze plug back up in here and tap that with a hammer so it locks in there. Maybe we ought to tap it with a center punch to give it a... Okay, right there. Okay, that's great. That locks it in there, keeps the dirt from getting down the kingpin. Now,
So,
Fred,
let's put the backing plate on it. Ray's putting the steering arm on now and a backing plate. One bolt holds both of them on. There's another bolt here, but that pertains to the brakes.
okay, now, let's
We're
get
going to
this.
slip this brake drum on, but only temporarily because we got to rebuild this brake system and install it.
We want to slip this on so we can send it over to the paint shop and get the frame painted black before we finish anything up. We're going to install all new brake lines on this, and we want those brake lines to be unpainted.
Next thing we're going to do is take out the spring compressor and install the sway bar, and this front end is finished. You're probably wondering why we're not going to install the brake lines before it's painted. We want it to look original. That's how they did it at the factory. We're not going to paint this frame ourselves. We're going to take it to a paint shop, and we're going to have it painted with black enamel with hardener. It's first going to be primed and then painted. When we get finished, or when the painter gets finished, this is going to be a bright, shiny, beautiful black. It's really going to look fantastic. Look familiar? This spindle assembly and kingpin looks just about like the Dodge we just finished with. The only difference is this is a straight axle, and it's out of about a 28 or a 29 Model A Ford. When it comes to alignment, the only way to get alignment on this is to bend this. This is something you're not going to be able to do. You're going to have to take it to a front-end shop. But you can overhaul this. You can take it apart. This is already shoved out most of the way. Take it apart, slip it off, have your machine shop press in the new bushings and fit them, and bring it back and assemble it. Next thing we're going to show you is how to overhaul a completely different front suspension. We're going to show you how to overhaul this suspension on this 71 Pontiac. This is a ball joint suspension with rubber bushings. I believe this is out of a 71 Firebird. This ball joint suspension is common to most of the cars from the middle 50s up to the present time. We made some preparations on this. This nut here was welded, as it is on the other side there. So we took a die cutter and very carefully cut away the weld, so that this nut will come off, and if we ruined any threads, this nut will straighten them back up. And if it doesn't, you can always run a tap on it. We also made sure that these lower control arm bolts here were loose. They can be a big problem. They can take hours of work to get out of there. We were lucky. We took a torch, and we heated the bolts up on both ends. And as the heat creeped through and loosened up the rust inside, we took a hammer and tapped on them, and they finally came out. There's been cases where we have had to take a die grinder, cut the bolt off, cut the head off, and then take the cutting part of the torch and go in and just knock off the remainder so it would fall back down out of the frame. Luckily, we didn't run into that. There's also a lot of times that those lower bushings, which don't seem to get as much wear as the rest of these, don't even have to be fooled with. That's kind of your decision whether you want to go through the whole thing or not. But we're going to put these in just to show you how to do it. We have made some preparations. We've taken the cotter keys out of the nuts here. We've taken, in addition to those bolts out, we've got the caliper loose here and ready to come off. We're going to take this bracket off here and get it out of our way. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to take the caliper loose. It takes a special wrench. Just 2 bolts hold this caliper on. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to take this rotor off. Get the cotter key out of it. Here, Ray, take this for me. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to put our tool down through here. It's a spring tool. Slide it down through that shock opening and the other piece up through here and hook it onto these coil springs. If you're doing this at home and you've got the engine in it, you got the weight of the car on it, all you have to do is put a jack right under here. And with that pressure of that jack, you can loosen up this nut here on this upper ball joint and slowly let it down, and it'll come unhooked here, and you can just lift the spring out. If I were to take this loose right now, unhook this, that spring would fly out like a bomb going off and kill somebody. Before we can do any work on this front end, we're going to have to compress that spring. And this is a tool that we're going to use. You can see it's offset because of the offset in the coils. This part here will go down through the hole where the shock fits up through. This part here will fit up through the control arm. Now that we got this puller in here and both of these pieces are hooked on these coils, all we have to do is tighten this up until we get that spring pulled up off of that lower control arm. When you know you can move this, it's safe to take out. You can see it's loose. There's no more pressure on it. Didn't take much. Next thing we're going to do is take this tie rod end loose. We want to get it off of this steering arm. These tie rod ends are tapered, and when they're tightened up, it pulls that taper up into this steering arm, and you can't hardly get it back out. They make a tool that is shaped like a fork, and it's tapered, and you drive it in here, and it'll pull that tie rod end out. Sometimes it damages them. We're going to show you a tip that we've been doing for years. You back this up with a heavy hammer. Let me get this nut off here first. You back this up with a heavy weight of any kind and then smack it hard. Even as thick as that is, that jolt will drive that right out of there. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to take this upper ball joint nut off so that we can drop this whole suspension down. So let me get started here. I'm not going to take it all the way off the nut because I have to do the same thing with this as we did with that tie rod end. This is also a tapered fit. Let me have that right. You want to, maybe I can get it. There it is. Now we can take the nut off the rest of the way. Next move, we'll take the lower one off. Our next move is we're going to press this ball joint out. We're going to leave this attached to the car, show you how you can do it at your house. We bought these ball joints and bushings at one of the local automotive stores. They supply, most of them supply a small press that will go around here to press it out, press it back in on the other side. So we'll show you how this is done.
Let's put this piece on right here. see if I can get
Is
this
it in?
Yeah, hold on just a second. Okay, tighten her up. Okay, that's that. Should be ready to come.
Got it?
Yeah, just take it off some more so I can get this spacer out of here. Okay. It's there. It is.
Well, that was rusted in there tight. Let's see the new one.
Boy, that was a job.
They're both the same. We're gonna have to clean this up a little bit before we press this one back in.
Okay, I got some sandpaper here, Fred. Let's try it. Get it cleaned up. See if we can make the new one go in easier. Also have some white lubricant here.
Okay, here, I'm gonna put a little around this.
Let's put some in here first and see if we... Okay.
Okay, let's see if we can get this shoved up in here.
Okay. And we need a bracket back here. And a wrench. Let me tighten it up a little bit. This ought to go pretty easy, Fred, because we got it cleaned out and I got grease on it.
Looks like you hit bottom, did you?
Yeah, it's about in there. Okay. I can see from the back side here that it's in. Okay. Now, Fred, we ought to take the A-frame off and get ready to put the bushings in the back end.
Give me that ratchet there.
I've already got the nut off of this front one, Fred. So I think I can pull it out. We should have okay. You know, they have to realize, Fred, that this is a tough job. This is not easy. This stuff doesn't come apart like it should sometime. Well, there's the lower A-frame. We're going to have to replace these bushings in here that we burnt for sure. And Fred, let's take the top off. Let's get the upper A-frame off and see if we can take a look at these bushings. Okay. All right.
Next job we got to do is take these rivets out and remove this ball joint.
Why don't we do that right up here, Fred?
Yeah, just let it hang here. You wanna let it
Just
hang?
right here. I can do it right here.
We ground the head off of these 4 rivets that hold this ball joint in this A-frame. Now we're ready to pop it up off of there.
Okay, Fred, we got it out of there. Now what we have to do is take our die grinder and cut these off, pop them through, and put the new one in with the special bolts they supply with it. Fred, what about these bushings back here?
We're going to take this to an automotive repair shop, parts supplier. They got special tools they can put in here and a press to press these new ones back in with. You can struggle with this forever. The same thing with the lower control arm. They do this for maybe $5, $10. When we were in business, there were certain things that we couldn't do. We couldn't grind crankshafts and we couldn't do chrome plating, and you got to rely on some outside sources. But the more of this you can do this yourself, the cheaper it is for you.
Better off you'll be.
We got both our control arms back with new bushings installed. We had 2 upper ones and 2 lower ones installed. Let me tell you something about these bushings. They're not meant to turn in this control arm or to turn on this shaft. They're locked up tight. You see the teeth on that bushing, on that sleeve inside? That locks up against the washer, and on the inside, it locks up against the shaft. And when you put this all together, you don't tighten this up right away. You leave it loose until you get all the weight on the car, because wherever you lock this up, that's where the car is going to set. All the movement is in the twist of the rubber. So we'll go ahead and install our new ball joint. These are a lot different than the one that came out. The one that came out of there was riveted. These just bolt in. Makes it very simple. Put a new boot over top of it, the retainer to hold the boot. The old one had the boot made right into it. We've got our ball joint installed, all good and tight. Next thing we're going to do is install this control arm on the chassis. These are the original shims we took out of it that is used to line this front end up. We're not going to put those back because we don't know where they belong. A front end man will do that. These two nuts that hold this control arm on, they're self-locking nuts. You can see where the top of the opening here is not quite round. The bottom is perfectly round. It requires no lock washers. We'll go ahead and install those. Tighten them up good and tight.
Okay, Fred. How about you taking that into the lower control arm and let's see if
Okay, you got your bolt?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Well, you know, this is a lot of hard work, Fred, but I guess it's worth it. You can save an awful lot of money if you do this yourself.
A job like this costs $500.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Once you get it cleaned, I've got my bolt through, Fred. Have you got a nut for it back there?
Yeah.
There it is.
No,
You want to get that? I can't reach it. Okay, and now next comes the spindle here. We have to make sure we get this spring back into position so it doesn't...
I tell you what we should do. We should get the jack, probably, you think, and lower this down?
No, I don't think so. This is going to stay up by
Think
itself.
so?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Fred, let's put the spindle on it next. You got the nut there, haven't you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's pull that up snug with a ratchet.
Okay.
Because right here we can see where the alignment hole is for the cotter key.
Yeah. We'll just snug this up. We can tighten it later.
Okay. Now you want to see if you can pull that up and I'll shove the spring over.
Okay, let me get the nut for the other one. Got it?
Yeah, you're in there.
Okay.
All right.
It's not through all the way yet. You're about a little more, just a little more. It's got it.
You want to tighten that with a wrench.
Okay.
And then when we get them both tightened up, we'll put our cotter keys in so we don't forget. That's a bad thing to put all this together and not put cotter keys as you go. You'll forget them and maybe cause an accident. Fred, while you're doing that, I'm going to hook up this
Okay.
tie rod end down here. And we'll put our cotter keys in that too. Good. Now we got a new sway bar link here that we're going to put on this. Can you see where the car keyhole is, Fred?
I think so.
Yeah, you got it in.
Here, you want to bend it down from the other side? And I'll tighten up the bottom one. Next, we're going to lower this spring and then take the spring compressor out. We wire brushed this frame and scraped it and painted it with chassis black. And it really looks good. It looks as good as what the factory did. All we have to do now is take the other portion out of this spring and this front end is done.